After 12 years in the military, I believed I had already seen the worst of what people could do. War teaches you things you can never unlearn. You learn how quickly trust breaks. You learn how cold fear feels when it settles in your bones. And you learn, above all, how to move when chaos begins, because hesitation gets people killed. But nothing in my service prepared me for what I would see that night in my parents' home. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 38, a former combat instructor and the single father of an 8-year-old girl who saved what was left of my life. Her name is Emma. She wasn't born into my bloodline. She was my sister Lily's daughter. Lily died in a car accident when Emma was just 2 years old. The father disappeared before she was even born. After the funeral, there was only me standing there in the silence of everything that had been destroyed. And my parents, they made their position clear that day. She isn't our responsibility, my mother had said, as if Emma were an object left behind in the rain. My father didn't even look at her. You're throwing your life away for a mistake, he added. I remember Emma gripping my sleeve with her tiny fingers, not understanding any of it, only that the adults around her sounded sharp and dangerous. That was the moment I decided. She wasn't a mistake. She was mine to protect. Years passed. I left active duty and moved into private security work. Nothing glamorous, just enough to give Emma a safe home, steady meals, and a childhood that didn't feel like abandonment. She became my entire world. Every morning she'd run down the stairs in mismatched socks and shout, "Morning, Captain Dad," and I'd salute her like it was the most serious mission in the world. But my parents never changed. No birthdays, no calls, no visits, just distance and silence. Like Emma and I were something they could erase if they ignored us long enough. Then came the call. My mother's voice was tense, almost panicked. "Your father collapsed," she said. "We need you to come immediately." I should have questioned it. Something about her tone felt rehearsed. But they were still my parents, and I still carried old instincts about family duty. So I packed Emma into the truck, and we drove into a gathering storm. The sky darkened fast. Wind pressed against the vehicle like something alive. Lightning flashed across the fields, turning everything white for a split second before swallowing it again. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "Dad," she said softly, "are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me?" My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "No," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "They're just difficult people." But I knew even as I said it that I was lying. When we arrived, there was no emergency, no ambulance, no urgency. My father sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee like it was an ordinary evening. My mother stood near the counter, watching us as if we had interrupted something important. For a moment, I just stood there, realizing I had been tricked. "You said he collapsed," I said sharply. "My mother didn't even blink. We needed you here. That was it." No apology, no explanation. Emma stood behind me, dripping rainwater onto the floor, trying not to make herself noticeable. My father's eyes landed on her immediately. "She's still here," he muttered. Something inside me tightened. We stayed for dinner anyway. Emma insisted, quietly tugging my sleeve, afraid of conflict the way only children who have been rejected too many times are afraid. And I stayed because I didn't want her to see me walk away angry. But tension filled every corner of that house. Then my father leaned back in his chair and said almost casually, "Kids today are weak, no discipline, no respect." Emma lowered her gaze instantly. That small movement, her trying to make herself smaller, was what broke my patience. "Don't talk about her like that," I said firmly. He looked at me like I was still a child under his authority. "You've become soft since you left the military." Before I could respond, the lights flickered, then died. Thunder cracked overhead so loudly the windows shook. Emma flinched, and in that moment, my mother snapped. "This is why everything in this family is falling apart," she shouted, pointing at Emma. "Ever since you brought that child into our lives, stop," I warned. But she didn't. She stepped toward Emma. "You ruined his future," she hissed. Emma backed away, whispering, "I'm sorry." That apology didn't belong in her mouth. Not ever. It was learned, conditioned, and it destroyed something inside me. I stepped between them immediately. "You will not speak to her again." My father slammed his hand on the table. "Then get out of my house." I didn't hesitate. Gladly, I turned to take Emma's hand, but before we could leave, my father moved fast. He opened the front door and shoved her outside. Into the storm. Emma screamed as cold rain swallowed her small body. For a second, everything in me went silent. Then instinct took over. The same instinct that had carried me through combat zones, through explosions and ambushes, through every situation where hesitation meant death. I grabbed my father by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "If anything happens to her," I said low and deadly, "you won't survive what I become." Then I ran. Straight into the storm. The storm didn't care what I was feeling. Rain hit like shattered glass against my skin. Wind tore through the trees so violently it sounded like something screaming in the dark. Lightning flashed in brutal bursts, turning the world into fragments of white and shadow. And somewhere out there, my daughter was alone. "Emma," I shouted again, my voice swallowed instantly by thunder. No answer. That silence was worse than the storm. My military training took over before panic could fully form. You don't survive rescue missions by guessing. You survive by thinking terrain, distance, shelter points. Water flow. My eyes scanned fast ditch line near the road, broken fence, fallen branches. Anything could trap a small child in weather like this. Then I saw it. A small pink shoe lying near the edge of the muddy drainage ditch. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe for a second. I ran. Mud swallowed my boots as I dropped into the ditch, flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam cut through sheets of rain, revealing broken branches, debris, and water rising fast. "Emma," I shouted again, voice breaking now. Then I heard it. A faint sound. Not even a word. Just a cry buried under thunder. I followed it instantly. Training says never ignore weak signals in rescue conditions. Weak signals mean life. I pushed through soaked brush and collapsed wood until I saw her. Emma was curled against a fallen tree trunk, half, covered in mud and rainwater, her small body trembling violently. Her stuffed rabbit was clutched so tightly in her arms that her fingers had turned white. For a second, I froze. Not from shock, from fear of what I was about to lose. "Emma," I said again, softer this time, her head lifted slowly. The moment she saw me, her face crumpled. "Dad," she whispered, like she didn't believe I was real. I reached her in seconds and pulled her into my arms. Her body was ice cold. That terrified me more than anything in combat ever had. "I'm here," I said firmly, wrapping my jacket around her. "I've got you. You're safe now." She buried her face into my chest and started crying deep, shaking sobs that had been held back by fear and shock. "I tried to come back," she cried. "I didn't know where to go." "Hey," I interrupted gently but firmly. "Look at me," she did barely. "You did everything right." I said, "You survived, that's what matters." But inside me, something had already shifted. Because she shouldn't have had to survive anything like this. Behind us, through the storm and the distance, I could still see the faint outline of my parents standing in the doorway. Watching, not moving, not calling for help. Just watching. That image burned into my memory in a way I knew would never fade. I lifted Emma into my arms and started walking back through the storm. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of exhaustion, but because something inside me had changed permanently. When I reached the house, my mother finally spoke. "She'll get the floor dirty," she said coldly. Emma flinched in my arms. That tiny reaction snapped something inside me completely. I looked at my parents for a long moment. Not as a son, not as a child trying to earn approval, but as a man who had just pulled his daughter out of near death. "I want you to understand something," I said quietly. My father scoffed. "Don't start preaching. I'm done listening." I cut in. Silence fell. Even the storm outside felt quieter for a second. "I spent years thinking family meant loyalty," I said. "I spent years convincing myself you were just strict, not cruel." My mother's expression hardened. "We raised you better than this." "No," I said. "You controlled me better than this." I shifted Emma slightly in my arms. She was still shaking, but her breathing was stabilizing. "That child," I continued, "is 8 years old, and she just got thrown into a storm because you couldn't control your anger." My father stepped forward. "She's not." "Finish that sentence," I warned, voice dropping lower, sharper. He stopped. For the first time, he actually stopped, because he heard it, not emotion, not argument. A soldier's tone, the tone that comes right before consequences. I turned toward the door. "We're leaving," I said. My mother laughed bitterly. "You'll come crawling back, you always do." I didn't respond, because something in me had already made a decision. As I stepped outside again, holding Emma close against the storm, I realized the truth clearly for the first time. They didn't see her as family. They didn't see her as human enough to matter. And I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. Behind us, the house disappeared into rain and darkness. Ahead of us was the road, and something inside me whispered a final warning. This wasn't over, not even close. Emma slept for less than an hour that night. Even after I got her home, dried her clothes, wrapped her in blankets, and checked her temperature repeatedly, her body still shook in small waves like the storm had followed her inside. Every time thunder rolled in the distance, her eyes snapped open. That was the moment I realized something worse than physical injury had happened. Trauma had taken root. At 2:47 a.m., she grabbed my hand in her sleep and whispered, "Don't leave me outside again." I felt something inside my chest crack. I stayed awake beside her bed until morning. Because soldiers know this truth. After the battle ends, the real damage shows itself in silence. The next day, I checked my dash camera footage. I always kept it running out of habit. Old military logistics mindset. You don't rely on memory when truth matters. I sat at the table and watched it. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time felt worse. Clear footage showed everything. My parents opening the door. Emma standing in the rain, shaking. My father grabbing her arm, and then he pushed her outside into the storm. No hesitation, no concern. Just dismissal. My mother didn't stop him, didn't move, didn't even call her name. When the video ended, the silence in the room felt heavier than the storm itself. My hands were steady. That surprised me, because anger didn't always make soldiers explode. Sometimes it made them focus. My phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I answered. No greeting, just silence. Then his voice came through, irritated. "You need to stop acting like this is some kind of crime scene." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted him to hear the quiet. "You're overreacting," he added. "She's fine." That sentence, "she's fine," landed like an insult to reality itself. "She was thrown into a storm," I said calmly. "She needed discipline." He replied. Something cold settled inside me. "Discipline," I repeated. "Yes," he said, as if it was obvious. I exhaled slowly. "Do you know what discipline is?" I asked. He scoffed. "Don't lecture me. Discipline protects people." I interrupted. "It doesn't abandon children in weather they can't survive." A pause. Then he changed tone. You've become weak since leaving the military. That word again, weak, I almost smiled. Because only people who don't understand strength use it as an insult. You think I'm weak? I asked quietly. Yes, he said without hesitation. That was the moment I stopped seeing him as my father and started seeing him as a threat to my daughter. You made a mistake, I said. What? He asked. You left evidence. Silence. I ended the call, then I backed up the footage. Multiple copies, cloud storage, encrypted drives, every detail preserved. Because in the military, emotion doesn't win cases. Evidence does. 2 days later, Emma's school called. Panic attack during recess, triggered by another child mentioning grandparents. I arrived in minutes. She was sitting in the nurse's office, shaking, eyes wide like she was still trapped in rain. When she saw me, she stood immediately and ran into my arms. Are they coming again? She asked. That question changed everything. Because fear in a child doesn't fade on its own, it spreads. That night, I contacted a lawyer, not for revenge, for protection, for custody safeguards, for legal distance. When I showed her the footage, she didn't speak for almost a full minute. Then she said, "This is clear endangerment. My parents didn't expect consequences. That was their mistake. They thought their age, their status, their authority meant immunity. But systems don't care about pride. They care about proof." Still, they didn't stop. Instead, they struck back. False reports, anonymous complaints to child services. Rumors spread through town that I was unstable, that I had violent tendencies. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was character assassination. But they underestimated something important. I wasn't the same man I was before that storm. I wasn't just a son anymore. I was a guardian in a system that now had records, footage, witnesses, and law on my side. And more importantly, I was no longer asking for their approval. I was preparing for their consequences. The first hearing was scheduled on a gray morning that felt heavier than the storm night itself. Emma held my hand so tightly in the courthouse hallway that I could feel her fear through her fingers. She hadn't spoken much that morning, just small questions repeated softly, like she needed reassurance the world hadn't changed again while she slept. "Dad, they won't take me, right?" "No," I said firmly, "not today, not ever." But I also knew something else. This wasn't just about today. This was about everything. My parents arrived like they were walking into a performance they still believed they could control. My mother wore a carefully arranged expression of distress, eyes slightly red, posture fragile. My father walked behind her with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned in his life. They still thought this was a family disagreement, not a case file, not evidence, not consequences. They were wrong. Inside the courtroom, Emma sat beside me, her legs swinging slightly because she was too small for the chair. I kept my hand on her shoulder the entire time. The judge entered. The room changed. Even my father straightened instinctively, as if authority still worked the way it used to in his house. It didn't. My lawyer stood first. Then came the footage, the storm video. No commentary, no interpretation. Just truth. The screen lit up the courtroom. Emma standing in rain. My father grabbing her arm. The push. The fall into darkness. A child disappearing into a storm. The silence that followed wasn't just legal. It was human. Even the air felt suspended. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father's expression tightened, but for the first time neither of them spoke. Because the footage didn't argue, it exposed. The judge paused the video mid-scene. Her voice was calm but sharp. "This is a minor." My father tried to speak. She was being stopped. The judge said immediately, one word. And he obeyed. That was new for him. The restraining order was approved within minutes, no hesitation. No debate. Emma's safety was legally protected. But the case didn't end there, because truth has layers. As my lawyer continued presenting documentation, something else surfaced: my grandfather's estate records. Hidden transactions, missing funds, transfers made while I was deployed overseas. At first, I didn't react. Then the numbers became clear. Over $200,000 gone, used, spent. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in him. Not anger, not control. Fear, because soldiers recognize patterns instantly, and this pattern wasn't emotional anymore. It was criminal. The courtroom changed temperature after that. The judge ordered an immediate financial investigation. And suddenly, the narrative my parents had built for years began collapsing in real time. After the hearing, reporters waited outside. I didn't plan to speak, but one of them asked a simple question. Why are you pursuing this so strongly? I looked down at Emma. She was holding her stuffed rabbit again, calmer now, but still close to me, and I answered honestly. Because she's a child, I said, and she deserves adults who don't confuse authority with cruelty. That clip spread faster than I expected. People don't ignore truth when it's simple. Back home, things changed quickly. Neighbors stopped listening to rumors. Teachers at Emma's school became more attentive. Even strangers who once looked at me with suspicion began to understand the story wasn't what they had been told. But my parents didn't accept defeat. They escalated. They tried to paint me as unstable. They called me aggressive. Dangerous, unfit. Another CPS visit followed. The social worker walked through our home slowly, observing everything. Emma stayed close to me the entire time. At one point, she whispered, "Are you in trouble because of me?" That question nearly broke me. "No," I said firmly. "You are never the problem." When I showed the social worker the footage, everything shifted. Her expression changed from professional neutrality to something much heavier. Disgust. By the time she left, she didn't question me anymore. She questioned them, and that was the beginning of the end for my parents' control. Because once systems see evidence clearly, influence stops working. Later that night, I sat outside with Emma under a quiet sky. No thunder, no wind, just stillness. She leaned against me. "Dad, yes, are we safe now?" I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since that storm night, I could answer without hesitation. "Yes," I said softly, "we are now." She smiled faintly and closed her eyes, but I stayed awake a little longer, because I understood something clearly. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was aftermath, and in the aftermath, truth always collects its final debt.